Good morning, colleagues. Today, in our discussion of the tenets of Western freedoms and Western civilization, I wanted to mention a few of the things that stuck out most to me in the readings for this week and just the overall concept of Western civilization in the modern world. And the first was the reading by Rosenthal Pubel, and he argued about how the tenets of modern freedom are very vastly different than the tenets of ancient freedom. And essentially, modern freedom is this idea of unrestricted freedom, that you are free to have economic freedom, freedom of speech, freedom of religion, and even so much so, as we saw during the last 3 years of the worldwide crisis, the pandemic, how in the United States and other parts of the world, individuals really resisted the idea of public health being part of a government authority, and that this freedom to live your life the way you feel that you should live your life, that unrestricted freedom is, in fact, what American freedom and Western civilization is all about. However, conversely, and I think more importantly, ancient freedom is about how freedom actually aligns with virtue. And I feel like that is really a segue into how the Western world ended up being really solidified as as an idea, as an entity, as a cultural notion is due to this idea of virtue, thus through the Protestant religion. And it's interesting to me how over time, uh, the idea of negative freedom has just become the standard, and yet there's really no basis as to why negative freedom is, in fact, the truest form of liberty. Um, how, in fact, there's an argument, an old ancient argument from many philosophers that does say that negative freedom is the tipping point into anarchy, which is then the tipping point back into tyranny. And I think that's a very interesting and yet very pertinent um, observation to make. I wanted to talk about how the freedom of religion is so important to our identity, and I think foundational cultural, like foundational roots as the West. And what I thought was so interesting about that, and I'm kind of grappling with the idea in my mind about assimilation and negative freedom, and kind of looking at the example that Hanan gave us about Guy Fawkes Day. I'm married to a South African, and he knows all about Guy Fawkes Day. And as an American, being that George Washington put the kibosh on that a long time ago, we don't celebrate it. I didn't really understand what it meant. But Hanan did such a great job to explaining to myself and the rest of our readers about how that was this assimilation, how it's now an assimilation of something that was very, very brutal and very, very bloody at the time. And I think that that is what is happening in our country and in Western civilization, and is that there's pieces of these old world, very bloody, very violent conflicts in which Western civilization is a crucible that was forged, and yet we've sort of assimilated into this idea that we are just free and do not have really the reasons or the historical basis or the factual evidence to explain why.